Hi, I'm Miss Roz. Today we are going to make macaroni and cheese. All right, so one thing you definitely need is to have some water. So I have some water on the stove and it is heating up. I have a minimum of about 4 cups of water, and then I need a cup of some macaroni. The one that I have right now is the elbow macaroni. However, you can use kind of any small type of pasta that you would like, so shells, or even like the rotini or any of those options. I also have 2 tablespoons of some butter, and then 2 tablespoons of some flour, a cup of some milk, a cup of some cheddar cheese, and then I have a half a teaspoon of dry mustard, a half a teaspoon of some salt, and then about a pinch or so of some black pepper. Right. So the first thing I want to do is to boil my water and make sure that it is actually, in fact, boiling before I add the pasta. Right. So what we want is what we call a rolling boil. Right. Rolling meaning the water is moving very quickly. Right. If you see the little bubbles coming up, that's not quite a rolling boil. Right. I want big bubbles. I want lots of movement. Right. Like you learned in science class, with heat means that there's going to be a lot of movement of those molecules, right? So you might be able to see here in my water there, right? That's a rolling boil. You can see all that moving. Right now, with that being said, right, I'm going to add my pasta into here, right? When you're going to boil water, right, you can put a lid on it if you would like. It does help to kind of keep all that pressure and heat inside, and it does help to make the water boil faster. However, once you add the pasta in, you want to make sure you leave that lid off, or it's going to overflow, right? They also say, salt. You would need to put in a lot of salt in order for that to kind of affect the boiling of the water. And so typically when people put salt into that water, it's more for flavoring and taste than anything else. All right, so here's that cup of pasta. Oops, just a couple of pastas got astray. And then I'm gonna actually just turn this down one, and then I'm gonna mix it a couple of times, just to make sure that it doesn't stick to itself. All right, so just use a spoon, right, and mix that pasta around, right? But I do want it to come back to a boil, and I want it to cook, right? So while I'm waiting for that to cook, I do want it to cook probably about for 5, maybe 6 minutes, right? I want it what we call al dente, right? Al dente means to the tooth, right? To the bite, right? So it should be a little, it shouldn't be mushy, okay, but it shouldn't be hard either. It should have just a little bite to it, right? And then I also am going to get a colander, right? Because it's only a cup of pasta, I need a small colander. Just keep in mind that when you go to drain your pasta, right? Draining pasta is a one-person job. Interestingly, in my many years of teaching, I have seen students where one person holds the strainer over the sink, and then the other person tries to pour the hot water into your colander, which tends to be a little dangerous, right? So when you're doing this, make sure that you only have one person draining your pasta. So you can just put your colander straight into your sink, and then you can just pour it down when it's ready. Right now, for the actual sauce, the cheesy sauce, right? We're going to. It's actually pretty quick, and there's not a lot of ingredients. But the first 2 ingredients you need are butter, okay, and then you also need flour, right? And when you cook butter and flour together, you get what we call a roux, okay? So ROUX. When you go to make this, I typically like to use a wire whisk, right? So what's going to happen is it's typically equal parts butter to equal parts flour, so a 1-to-1 ratio, right? So taking the butter, I'm going to pour that butter into my pan. And then I want to melt that butter all the way down before I add my flour. Okay, let's see if I can prop you up a little more so that you can see into the pan. Ah, there we go. Perfect. Okay. And then you might be able to hear the pasta cooking in the background, so I'm just going to mix it a few more times, just to make sure it doesn't stick. Alright, so here we go. Alright, so into my pan is my butter. Right, the key to this is that to make sure that you don't burn your butter. Okay. So I'm going to let this butter melt. Right? I have just like a pot to use here, so a pot, or I'm sorry, a pan I should say. Pot typically has 2 handles, a pan has 1. Right, so just melt down this butter, and then I'm going to mix in that flour. So generally speaking, most milk-based sauces and soups start out with what we call a roux. Right, so melt down the butter, and then add my flour. Right. And then you want to really mix this well together. Right, you want to make sure that that flour dissolves into the butter, and that you don't have any lumps. Okay. Right, and then this is actually when I'm going to add the rest of my spices. So I had a little salt, a little pepper, and then a little mustard. It's all going to go in there, and then I'm going to also mix that around, make sure that that all mixes well into my roux, my R-O-U-X. Alright, and now I'm going to add my milk. Alright, so this, when you add milk to a roux, this is what we actually call a bechamel sauce. A bechamel sauce is one of those what we call mother sauces, meaning the base of a lot of where other sauces come from. Alright, so this I'm cooking at like medium to medium high. So I'm actually at about 6 on my stove. So notice that when I do this, right, I'm going to add a little milk to it, right? But then I'm going to make sure that I whisk it all together, right? And what I want to happen is I want that milk to start absorbing into my roux before I add more. Right? This process takes a little time. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. Right? So once once it starts to absorb, it's going to look more like kind of mashed potatoes or like maybe baby food. Then I can start to add a little more milk to it. Right? This ensures that your bechamel sauce, which then turns into your sauce for your mac and cheese, is nice and smooth. Right? If you dumped it all in, it would get very clumpy. Right? And then you wouldn't have a nice smooth sauce. Right? So again, as it starts to get thicker, right, then we can keep adding a little more milk. Right, so notice I keep adding just small amounts at a time. Alright, so I'm going to just go for a sec, just check my pasta. Right, one of the things about the pasta is that you'll be able to, let's see if we can see it. Right, a lot of times with the pasta you'll notice that the edges are one color but the rest of it is not, and that typically means it's not quite done. It should be almost the same color. Alright, so maybe like not even a minute left on that pasta. Alright, I'm going to keep adding a little more to this roux. Alright. Anytime I'm cooking pasta where I'm going to be adding it to something else that's hot, such as the cheese sauce, I'd like to keep it al dente so that it doesn't get mushy when it cooks in with my cheese sauce. Right. on mixing this. And make sure you get the sides of your bowl, your pan. All right. And then let's add the rest of that liquid. Right, and then I want to mix this until it starts to get thick. All right, once it gets thick, then I can add my cheese and then my pasta. Okay. Like I said, this is going to take a little bit of time. It doesn't thicken right away, especially once all of that milk is in there. So it does take a little time. But once it starts to thicken, you can add that cheese, turn the heat off, right, and then mix it all together. Now, you could eat the pasta, the macaroni and cheese just as it is once it's all put together, or you could also put it into a pan and sprinkle some more cheese on top and then bake it at 350 for maybe like 8 to 10 minutes, and that'll kind of just give that some time for that cheese to kind of settle in, especially if you liked more baked macaroni and cheese, or if you want to put on breadcrumbs. But this is the recipe that I gave is a very just simple recipe that doesn't include all the breadcrumbs and everything. Okay, now that this is nice and thick, I'm going to add that cheese in there. Right, now I just use regular cheddar cheese. Right, if you want to make and get kind of fancy, you could use other types of cheese, Gruyere, some of like that jalapeno, whatever it is that you want. That's entirely your choice. But I actually like kind of just the standard cheddar cheese sauce. Okay, and then, right, once that's all mixed together, I'm going to turn the heat off so it doesn't burn my cheese. Right. And then, here's my drained pasta. Pour that in. Alright, and then just mix this all together, and now I have mac and cheese. So like I said, you could bake it if you want, or you could just eat it as is. Okay. Alright, and that, folks, is mac and cheese. Hope you enjoy, and I will see you again later.